Hello, my name is Rebecca Chung, and I am the director of 21 CSLA State Center. We welcome you to Research Practice Webinar 13 of 21 CSLA entitled How Teacher Diversity Supports Diverse Students and Families in Early Childhood. Today's webinar is sponsored by 21 CSLA, and 21 CSLA State Headquarters is at UC Berkeley. I invite my colleague to provide a land acknowledgement at this time.
On the first day of Native Heritage Month, we acknowledge that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other Verona Band descendants. We acknowledge that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Furthermore, we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. In response, members of the Berkeley School of Education contribute to the Shumi land tax, a voluntary financial contribution to Sograia Te Land Trust, an organization led by Indigenous urban women. Their creative collections provided the artwork displayed on the screen. If you do not live in Berkeley, we encourage you to visit nativeland.ca to learn more about the land you occupy and find meaningful ways to support the Indigenous stewards of that land.
Thank you. 21 CSLA is the 21st Century School Leadership Academy. It is dedicated to the professional learning and support of California's educational leaders at the teacher, site, and district level to create more equitable learning environments that ultimately improve success for underserved students. We believe that Leaders for Equity transform education to improve access, opportunity, and inclusion for students and adults, especially those who are systemically marginalized and historically underserved, so they can thrive. 21 CSLA is funded by the California Department of Education, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and the State Board of Education. And now we will begin webinar 13 entitled How Teacher Diversity Supports Diverse Students and Families in Early Childhood. And we're honored to have Professor Anna Markowitz, who is a professor at the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies, as our featured scholar. Dr. Markowitz is interested in investigating how policies shape the context of human development, and in particular, the links between policies, the skills and attitudes of the adults that children interact with, and children's development. She is a quantitative scholar who uses her methods to explore how policies can impact early childhood education programs, especially with a focus on ameliorating income-based disparities in children's development, and with particular attention to social and emotional outcomes. Please join me in welcoming Professor Anna Markowitz.
Hi all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Rebecca. As you said, my name is Anna Markowitz, and I'm here to talk to you about something near and dear to my heart, which is the amazing work that early educators do and how the incredible diversity of this workforce is essential for supporting young children and their families in early childhood. Next slide. And I'm particularly excited to be having this conversation with 21 CSLA because I think the topic that I'm discussing really aligns with the equity statement, and in particular this idea that education, the Leaders for Equity can transform education to improve access, opportunity, and inclusion, so all children can thrive. And that's really what early education has been thinking about for a long time. So next slide. Early care and education, or ECE, as I'll often say, is something that was sort of built with the idea that providing something to children and families when children are quite young can really build access to later services and skills, more opportunity, and then opportunity to thrive. Why is that? Well, opportunity gaps and their pernicious effects are actually visible quite early. I'm sure this is old news to many of you, but I think it's always important to call out the fact that we can see differences in children's development along all sorts of dimension, cognitive, social, and emotional, from a very early age, from the first year of life. And we can see these differences in ways that are aligned with what we know about systemic marginalization and historic white supremacy in the United States. This shouldn't be too surprising. Children are developing quite rapidly in the first 5 years of life. In fact, they're developing more rapidly then than they will ever again. Children are making and pruning the brain connections that are going to serve as the literal foundation for everything else that they'll do in their lives. That is their later skills, they're learning to speak, they're learning what it feels like to interact with others, and what they want to do with their bodies and emotions and how to guide those. Being with a supportive adult along this incredible journey really, really matters. And in fact, there are several early childhood programs that have demonstrated positive long-term impacts, and particularly for those children that we know that we owe the most to. And this isn't just the famous ones. We've heard Perry and Abecedarian bandied about sort of anytime somebody wants to do an article on early childhood, but this is also Head Start. This is also public pre-kindergarten in Oklahoma and public pre-kindergarten in Boston, just to name a few. In fact, the evidence that high quality early education can really work and can really support particularly kids from marginalized backgrounds and kids who speak a language other than English has led to a massive increase in public investments over the past 30 or so years, including the investment that we're now seeing here in California. Next slide. But of course, the magic of early education, the reason all of these programs work, is about the quality of what's happening every day. And that quality is entirely hinged on what the early educators are supported to be able to do and sort of who they are in the room. Next slide. I always like to have a slide like this in my talk because I think it's important to call out what this work is, because sometimes it looks different than what we think teaching and learning is. Early educators do work that's intellectually complex and very physically demanding. Children learn in relationships. They learn through rich conversation with an adult who knows them really well and can use information about what they're saying now, but also what they were saying yesterday and the day before, to ask that sort of just right question that will bring a child to a new level of conceptual understanding. It involves always being on, which I'm sure the educators in the room can relate to. It involves intentionally using really rich language and being able to prepared to explain that rich language to children, and really just being prepared for anything. Part of the reason this work can be challenging is because children's self-regulatory capacities are still developing. It's very normal for a child who is in the first 5 years of life to still be trying to figure out what to do when a big feeling comes their way. So early educators have to deal with many and varied situations and deal with a lot of emotion management. They feel their feelings all over their bodies, like we all do, but unlike us, they don't know what to do about it. Their bodies don't have the blueprint yet. And so this is very true of 4-year-olds, and this is very true for educators who work for them. They need to manage those situations. They need to think about all the children in the room and keeping them safe and well, while teaching individual children strategies to help them feel better, while respecting the right to the feelings. And how well they do that has everything to do with how children will think about later learning opportunities, how they'll interact with schools, what school means to them moving forward. In fact, early educators are a major part of children and families' first experiences with schools, and will be integral in messaging to parents that school is for them and that they have agency in their child's learning. It's important to note that these early educators that do this work are almost entirely women, and they're currently one of the most diverse workforces in the entire United States. In California, in fact, early educators on average are majority women of color. This is a huge asset in part because young children and their families in the United States are also the most diverse group in terms of both race, ethnicity, and heritage languages spoken. And of course, this is true in California. For children learning 2 languages, having an educator with a shared cultural or linguistic background is incredibly helpful. When you're learning 2 languages, your brain is learning both and all of the rules that entails at the same time, and while also trying to tease those links apart. So to grow either language, it's essential to be hearing both all the time, and having the opportunity to hear that in home at school is a real boon. It's also the case that families that have strong immigrant or cultural backgrounds often want that background visible in their children's early education. Even in the case of English-only families, research has documented consistently that having a teacher that shares that racial or cultural background is linked to a host of positive outcomes, including improved academic outcomes, social outcomes, and emotional outcomes. And notably, among older children, match has also been linked to more attendance in school and lower exclusionary discipline. Next slide. So we know that early educators are important, and we know that they bring a lot to children and families, particularly when they're diverse. But we're not exactly sure why. There are several hypotheses, and for young children, one hypothesis that's gaining some traction is about how congruence across language or race, ethnicity, or culture might create a stronger bond between teachers in the classroom and the adults that are caring for young children at home. There is a large literature that documents how schools may fail to serve the needs of children and families of color, particularly if those families speak a heritage language that isn't commonly spoken in the school. And research has also shown that strong homeschool connections will be meaningful for children in the long term in school and at home. Why this might be the case? Well, schools have a particular culture and way of doing things that may seem at odds with what families know or expect. Without speaking English fluently or understanding US school culture, parents might not feel they have the power to advocate for their child or explain their child's particular circumstance. When a misunderstanding or issue arises, particularly a behavioral issue, parents may not feel they have the capacity to advocate for their child in the way that they might wish to. In contrast, when those connections are strong, kids are more likely to attend school, experience less discipline, and do well in the long term. There's also, interestingly, some research among very young children that relationships between parents and teachers also create this really nice congruence between what happens in school and what happens at home, which is really helpful for young children that are trying to understand how the world works. Next slide. So what I did in my study was sort of try to pull these things together and ask the sort of next level question. Is teacher-child racial ethnic match linked to increased parent engagement at the school? Is there evidence that we see that in a large national sample? And I set out to answer this question in Head Start for a few reasons. First, it's a major public investment in early learning, so it's good to understand whether our investments are working as we would hope. It serves an incredibly diverse group of children and families who have experienced marginalization. So it's nice to know if it works or if there are good things happening in this population. And third, and sort of relevant for this application, is that recent Head Start policy required a large increase in the proportion of educators who had bachelor's degrees. And this increase in the proportion of educators who had bachelor's degrees happened alongside an increase in the proportion of teachers who were white in the Head Start workforce. And this was sort of an unintended consequence. And so it feels important to provide data on what perhaps is lost when some of that teacher diversity is lost. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through the quantitative methods in incredible detail, although I'm certainly happy to answer questions about them. But essentially, we use parent and teachers' own self-identification of their race ethnicity to identify whether or not there was a match. A huge limitation of the study and of much of the match literature right now is that we could only make matches between non-Hispanic Black and non-Hispanic Black teachers and parents, Hispanic of all nationalities and backgrounds, and non-Hispanic white. We were unable to look at children and families of other races, ethnicities, because the prevalence of that match was very, very low, and we wouldn't get a good estimate, and we didn't want to sort of say something untrue. But that's a major limitation, and this is also a limitation in terms of our inability to look at linguistic match in particular. One thing I do want to note is that that just means in most cases we underestimated likely the true overall power of match. We looked at 3 types of parent involvement. The first was child-specific involvement, so going to those parent-teacher meetings, being in the classroom with your kiddo, observing, volunteering. Next, we look at general involvement, which is participating in Head Start Policy Council. You can think of that as sort of a PTA or with Head Start newsletters or fundraising. And these are really opportunities for parents to have agency and ownership of the space, which is why we really liked these items. And then last, Head Start is really committed to supporting parents as well. And so these are both sort of social opportunities for parents to connect with other parents who are going through similar things as them, and also sort of opportunities for them to connect to any services or other job opportunities, job fairs, things like that, that Head Start can provide to help families. Next slide. So again, what I did was basically run a bunch of quantitative models that allowed us to ask, for children and families who all attended the same Head Start center, did having this match mean that parents were doing more at Head Start? So I'm going to show you this result in a set of bar graphs because I think the bar graphs tell the story best. So what this figure is showing is the effect of match across all children. And so the first thing I think to note is that Head Start families really do engage, even though I think sometimes there's a narrative that people like to say that families aren't engaging as much as they should. Almost all students, all parents, excuse me, have visited Head Start. More than half have volunteered or been in the classroom for something. So there is a lot of engagement. Even with this high level engagement, we can see that sort of across all outcomes, that blacker bar that represents match as opposed to the grayer bar that represents no match, that match bar is always higher. In all cases, if you experience racial ethnic match, you were doing more and engaging more with Head Start than if you did not. So just sort of an example, you can see here that for parent-teacher conferences, although again, both bars were high, you can see it's slightly higher for match by about 2 or 3 percentage points. Next. This is the only one we don't really see a difference on with visiting Head Start. Next. And you can see, you know, a lot more parents will go in and sort of observe the classroom. We like this outcome because we think it also shows a little bit parents, again, feeling that agency, feeling they can be in the classroom and be a part of it. Next slide. One thing that's important to note is that this next set of bar graphs is the results for specifically families who identified as Hispanic. One of our major theories here is about linguistic match, although we couldn't observe that in their data. One place to think about this was looking specifically among Hispanic families, many of whom in the Head Start setting speak Spanish. And you can see here that when we sort of get to something closer to a language match question, the effect sizes were much larger. So for example, these parents were much more likely to visit, volunteer in the classroom, observe the classroom. We really like that volunteering outcome because it seems to be something around sort of being in the classroom and being an expert in that classroom felt more accessible to those parents. Next. They're also far more likely to participate in these sort of parent-led activities at the Head Start site where parents were being leaders at Head Start. Next. And we also saw that parents were more likely to engage in sort of some of the social life and social supports that Head Start offered. Now, like I said, we can't say for sure because of limitations of the data, whether this was due to the linguistic component, but we did know whether or not the family spoke Spanish. And when we cut this to just Spanish-speaking families, we again saw these large differences. Next slide. So what does this all have to do with California's move to UPK? Well, as I mentioned earlier, part of the reason we did the study in the context of Head Start was because of Head Start's push to require teachers to have bachelor's degrees, and how because of structural inequality in the United States, that really increased the proportion of white teachers in the classroom. BA requirements often create a barrier to employment for groups who have been historically marginalized and minoritized, and people of color who receive their BAs are less likely than their white peers to go into teaching. So by sort of putting these credentials in place, which many of us think are very good for kids, we might be creating a context where the workforce is much, much whiter. But UPK, part of the reason we're doing it is because it presents an opportunity to connect children and families to schools when children are younger and to provide that essential early learning. And so we want to make sure we can do it in ways that families feel comfortable and engage and form a longer bond. In fact, I didn't present these data, but another key finding from this study is that match was also associated with a decrease in chronic absenteeism and an increase in the likelihood that children stayed on and went to their Head Start center again a second year. So we sort of that commitment to school demonstrated a link with match. So, you know, what can we do to sort of get this kind of feeling in the context of UPK? Next slide. Now, I mostly can't wait to hear what the practitioners have to say about it. These are just some examples from the literature to get us started. So in terms of school and classroom practices, we obviously can ensure match across all classrooms. And in fact, we probably would not want to, but we can break down barriers and get more parent expertise in the classroom. So engaging in culturally responsive teaching and bringing families as experts into the classroom is one important step. Obviously, providing materials in a variety of languages and thinking about when make decisions about staffing are made, thinking about variety of languages. Conduct extra outreach to families of color and families who speak languages other than English, or hosting family events that allow parents to connect among themselves, so that connection can perhaps come within the school community. Especially when children are struggling, really prioritize and honor family feedback. These moments where kids are struggling are moments that can alienate families in the long term. If they feel that their child is having a difficulty and the school reacted in a punitive way, or in a way that didn't understand where kids were coming from. And this may be an issue on the rise with an influx of younger fours into the classroom. So putting plans in place to just make it a policy to bring families into these conversations and to help create homeschool continuity is going to help not only children feel safe and know what to do in the classroom, but it's also going to help teachers be able to feel happy and confident working with the children in the room, which they want. Connect with wraparound care providers who may also have unique insights and strategies for working with children, particularly if TK is 3 hours. And then think about building equity across the different types of classrooms that participate in UPK. So here I'm thinking about TK and CSPP, excuse me, to build the potential for a match for children and families who might find that to be very important. Next slide. From a teacher placement and teacher pipeline perspective, when staffing classrooms, consider diversity within teaching teams and encouraging assistant teachers to be leaders in communicating with families. Consider diversity when making decisions about wraparound care providers. Raise concerns that you might have about teacher diversity when you're talking to folks at CDE, and really providing feedback so the state can invest in making the BA and credential pathway easier for the many amazing diverse educators that are already working with 4-year-olds in California. And finally, sort of consider the ways that through your own resources, you can provide learning opportunities or release time to assistant teachers or folks working with 4s who might not have that bachelor's degree yet, but it could help push them on to the attainment of additional credentials and kind of support that more diverse pipeline. So these are just sort of some ideas from the literature, but obviously I'm super excited to hear what the practitioners have to say. Next slide. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm excited for the rest.
Thank you, Professor Markowitz. I know it's not easy to summarize a very extensive study in a very short period of time. So thank you for doing that. At this time, we'd like to invite our 2 practitioner panelists to join the conversation. First, I'd like to introduce Yvonne Nelson, who is currently a P3 alignment coordinator at the Contra Costa County Office of Education. Ms. Nelson has been an educator for over 30 years. She spent 20 years working in elementary schools as a teacher and a coach, and 8 years working as an administrator in a Spanish immersion elementary school before assuming her role as P3 alignment coordinator at the Contra Costa County Office of Education. Our second practitioner is Miss Amparo Martin. She's currently the assistant principal at Florence Griffith Joyner Elementary and Visual Arts Performing Magnet in Los Angeles Unified School District. Ms. Martin has over 30 years of experience working in education. She has taught from kindergarten all the way through adults. And she spent 18 years as a teacher before becoming an administrator, first as a coordinator, and now she's in her 2nd year as an assistant principal in Los Angeles. So please join me in listening to some of the connections and reflections that Yvonne and Amparo have about Dr. Markowitz's research.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for inviting us to participate in this important work. And thank you to Dr. Markowitz for your important study. when I was listening to your research, there are two things that kind of stood out for me. A need to increase our teacher diversity and also uplift the teachers that we have working with us now. And some of the ways that we can increase our teacher diversity really has to center around the systems that we have in place and the pathways that we have for teachers, teachers' assistants, parents, our college students to be excited about coming into teaching. And just today, I was reading an article from the National Policy Institute about two programs that Fresno State and Fresno Unified and UCLA and LA Unified had previously have had that were residency programs. I think residency programs are very important because these two programs allowed people who were going into teaching to not only receive their teaching credential, but also receive their master's, which would then entitle them to a higher pay status, because I know sometimes people are hesitant to come into teaching due to financial concerns. And the other financial aspect of that was that the participants were paid stipends as part of that residency program. And as a result of those two residency programs, the Fresno State program had 67% of its participants be people of color, and the UCLA program had 72%. So I think we have to really go back and take a look at some of the programs that have been working, because as Dr. Markowitz stated and the research showed, it's really important for our families to be able to build connections. And when we have the same congruence within our systems, it's much easier. The other thing is uplifting our teachers that were there, and she had some excellent ideas as far as really making sure that culturally relevant teaching and culturally relevant classrooms are not an option. This is just our way of being, so that families feel welcome from the start. And utilizing our teachers' assistants and our support staff to build the relationships. They may speak the home languages and be able to build those connections.
Hello, everybody. My name is Amparo Martin. I want to speak a little bit more about the everyday occurrences that happen in the school sites, varying from elementary school all the way to adult school. One of the ways that we can definitely support and assist is helping those dependent learners cultivate an academic mindset. It's very critical in order for them to act on the feedback and move forward to independent learning, which is what we all aspire for our young scholars to be. Rebuilding mindsets begins with helping students notice their own progress, taking that extra time to humanize our young scholars. It makes them fulfill themselves in the social emotional aspect, reframing mistakes as information as an essential part of having a positive academic mindset. A lot of our families have not had a positive experience with schooling, and so we have to rethink that and portray that and carry that through and modeling as school leaders, to assuring that being an effective culturally responsive teacher means building an alliance with the students and the families. The teacher in the role of an ally is mindful of balancing rigor and expectations with support in order to avoid the triggering. and adding those offering those actionable correctable feedbacks is very vital. Feedback must be offered in ways that affirm and validate the student's capacity to learning, yet is honest on pinpointing where the student is in the relationship to his goal and offers the concrete steps of improving. In our families, I feel like we definitely have to promote and motivate our parents to not ask how is the behavior, but how can I support and provide resources to my child? We see most involvement in the young age, but when they get to fourth grade and on, we see less participation. And why is that? Why is that? Why is that focus so instilled in behavior? So I think that we have a lot of work in front of us, and where we need to build that, and in the classroom, it's building that student voice is so vital and critical. More discourse from students, not so much from the educators. Got to build the trust and the rapport in order to reassure our students that they are being safe, and more importantly, that they're being cared for.
Thank you both. I have a question before we invite Professor Markowitz to join our discussion. And it starts from the very beginning of her presentation, where she talked about the importance of just one single adult in a child's early development. And I align that all the way through this idea of the policies related to having a bachelor's degree as a way to improve the quality of programs, and how that might lead to some exclusionary hiring because of the additional requirements, all the way to your comments about the kinds of adults that students need in schools. My question is this: what do you think needs to be added to teacher professional development, or how leaders can add to the cultures of schools to accept teaching assistants and other providers, for instance, extended care providers and others who are interacting with students, to be seen as equal opportunity adults who can support students in their positive development? In other words, how does a leader set the culture so that every single adult working in the school, regardless of their licensure, their accomplishments in terms of their academics, and also the time of day in which they serve students, can be seen as that important adult in a child's life? What can we do?
I think that definitely making sure that we are monitoring and implementing and demonstrating to our teachers, what does culturally responsive teacher look like, and how do we give that constructive feedback, confronting their own bias. I still see every single day a lot of issues that are happening in the classrooms, and where they're very minute, but they're microaggressions that are building on into the students, and they are feeling the effects as they are trying to express themselves. So I think definitely creating a concrete development of what the teachers need to understand of what does a culturally responsive teacher look like and do, is definitely going to assist them understanding more of what we are heading for, being culturally aware.
I think the teacher, the student leader, rather, both the principal and the vice principal really set the tone as to what the mindset is at the school site. And if we as the school leaders present the idea that any staff are teachers, that all staff deserve the same respect, then that empowers the adults in our environment. At the school site that I was at, I'd often try and get parents to become part of our noon duty. And from noon duty, then I would be able to encourage them and teach them how to do tutoring and serve more as a teacher's assistant. And then often from there, they would formally apply to become a teacher's assistant, and then they would move on I had some who started as noon duty, and then they became behavior specialists or other roles that didn't necessarily require the BA, and then, or after school, a director. So this would give them the motivation and the excitement to be part of our school community. So as a school leader, I think there are so many adults in our environment who we can lift up. We're not only here to lift our students up, but we also need to lift up the adults in our school community so that we can support one another in the work and move forward.
Thank you. I want to encourage Dr. Markowitz to join our discussion. Do you have a question you'd like to ask the panelists?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, thank you for these amazing comments. I've taken so many notes already. I think one thing that I really loved about what Yvonne was just saying was thinking about sort of uplifting the existing excellence in the communities and thinking about the ways that teachers and parents can connect, and really the value of what parents have as well being brought upwards and into the conversation all the time. And I'm wondering how you think about sort of engaging that. I thought Amparo really brought up an excellent point around trust, basically, and how families that have had a difficult time in school may not trust teachers to really have their kids' best interests at heart, and this sort of like conflict that may come from past harms. How do you think about building up that trust and getting people to be confident? Are there sort of explicit ways to think about building that community trust that you all have engaged in, or recommendations you can make there?
Well, it's very important to have those conversations and building and doing that active listening of actually building that relationship by listening to the parents, listening to what they are feeling. A lot of the times they feel like we don't care, that we're just doing a checkoff. And so I think it's very vital for for us as school leaders to definitely listen out to our parents and what they're looking for. A lot of the times it's miscommunication and mistrust that led from someone else's experience.
I just wanted to add that within the day, there are so many opportunities to build relationships. As Amparo said, relationships are so vital in our work with our students and our families. And so one of the ways we did was we had a concierge type of drop off. So all of the administrators, sometimes the office staff, would go open the door for the students, welcome them in the morning, and just get their day off to a great start. And this actually was my favorite part of the day. And so within that, you're learning people's names, they're seeing your face every day. At one point, we had so many parents who were so appreciative of so many adults who were starting the day like that. They were dropping off coffee for the morning crew, and it was just a great way. So I think as administrators and school leaders, we need to be visible, and we need to just make connections. The families knew about my family. I knew about theirs. I knew who was having a soccer game on the weekend. And so just the simple day-to-day activities can really invite us to build the relationships.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question to this, which is related to something we haven't touched on, but was indicated in the research around multilingualism, and how being schools as multilingual cultures, or cultures that are accepting and inclusive of multiple languages and home languages of our and native languages of our students and also our families, can be a benefit. Well, I hope we all have the aspiration of being at least multilingual, bilingual, and maybe more than that, trilingual, quadrilingual. And it'll take some time for us to develop a workforce that is multilingual. But what can a monolingual person do, a leader or teacher, to be welcoming and to create an inclusive multilingual school? How can monolingual leaders and teachers help?
Well, I think to start off with is with a warm smile. That really goes a long way. We're humans. We can feed off of each other by just the presence and the energy that we transpire to our families. And so I I feel like I'm bilingual myself and I'm very fortunate in that sense, but for my monolingual teachers that ask me for, translation, I feel the energy that they give, and it makes it a lot more welcoming when a long smile goes away a long way, and a warm, handshake, or even an embrace of a hug. So I think that when we bring out more of the humanizing aspect of humanizing our families, it really allows for the conversation to move forward.
I think that as you mentioned, it may not be easy to attain a new language or all the languages that are represented in our classrooms, but to include the cultures and the families within the classroom, especially in our ECE classrooms, having pictures of the students' families, including them, asking, some of their traditions, for them, if possibly, to come in and share their traditions. We had a growing population of Indian students, and so we started the practice of celebrating Diwali across our school site. And families were so happy to see that they were part of the different celebrations that we had traditionally done. And just the simple thing of one of the things we would do is we had chalk that we would do drawings across the yard. The families were so happy to see things like that. So there are so many ways that we include the cultures. And like Amparo said, just a smile and a friendly welcome. If they see that we're trying to communicate, there have been many families who it was part sign language, part, just trying to figure things out, but they saw the effort. And so it really is about us bringing forth that effort.
Thank you. We're going to end this discussion with a chance for each of you to make a few closing remarks as we close out this discussion today. What are you thinking about? What do you want to investigate more? What are you taking away from this discussion? Professor Markowitz, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I'm just, first of all, taking away some inspiration and joy around all the good work that's already happening, and the ways in which the schools, as usual, are at the forefront of thinking about a lot of these issues, and, research comes along behind. So thank you for that. I also think I really appreciated how both of the practitioners really talked about this sort of multi-pronged approach that we need to take. It can't be just one or the other. I thought Yvonne said it really well. It's like, yeah, we have to think about increasing our diversity, but how do we uplift existing excellence in our communities as well? Something I want to think more about is, moving forward, the ways that community connections with places that children spend time in before they come to school, and how maybe that can build some of these bridges, especially with language discrepancies. If you have a school with a lot of monolingual teachers, is there a way that either wraparound care providers or community providers making connections to childcare centers, things like that, could create an opportunity for you to interact with bilingual adults that have been working with these families for a while? The early education workforce is so diverse, and there's so much bilingualism in it, and it's exciting to me to think about the ways that we can create more continuity for children and families by building stronger connections. And obviously that's a lot of work for schools, but then, because of how I think, I'm like, what policy would support that? How could we make that easier and better and smoother? And so that's, I think, something I'm really walking away with, is how else can schools be supported, both in working with the teachers that they have, but finding that excellence in their community. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And our practitioner panelists, Amparo, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I think that what I'm walking away with is definitely creating this, how do we enhance school culture and climate in every single school? How do we enhance to have systems and structures in place, and where we are always letting our teachers know of how important and vital it is to connect with our families in various ways. And that culture and languages should not be a factor. And where, how can we enhance our teachers to really look at our families as liaisons that can assist us with creating that rigor and bringing out the best of their child.
Yvonne, would you like to give a few closing comments?
Sure. In my new role, I really want to encourage conversations about pathways, because we are seeing so many districts who started the school year with not enough teachers. And when we think about teaching in general, it's not a popular occupation. And so what are the ways that we can change that narrative? And what are some of the pathways that we can create to encourage people to go into teaching? I love the fact that those residency programs not only offer teachers the opportunity to get their teaching credential, but to get their master's. When I was a teacher, so often I would say, I have enough units to have a master's degree with all of the classes I had to take, but I'm not acknowledged as having that master's. And so really having the respect that for all the preparation that we do, and that we are professionals who have elaborate and extensive educational background, but also at the same time opening that up and allowing for student teaching to be more of a residency that is paid, so that people who do want to go into teaching but are hesitant because they can't afford to do the free student teaching, this would allow them to take that pathway and give back.
Thank you. I'll add a few remarks myself. One is that we started this conversation with Professor Markowitz, really celebrating the work of early childhood teachers as important intellectual work, as well as physically demanding work. And I want to just take that to the next level and say that today's conversation reconfirms again for me the importance for K-12 leaders and K-12 policymakers to learn from early investments like Head Start. There are so many important things that we can learn from Head Start, an initiative that has developed a diverse workforce, an initiative that has a multilingual workforce, an initiative that has had success with parent involvement, for example, and positive family engagement. When I saw how many families observe classrooms, for example, I think about how powerful that is. If you're a K-12 leader, you probably have not seen numbers in terms of that level of involvement. And so we need to, as a system, be willing to learn from many who've gone before us, especially during this time of the implementation of the Universal Transitional Kindergarten policy. We have a real opportunity to learn from each other. Also, I want to just name, because it was raised in the among the participants, but we didn't have a chance to discuss it, how modern technology might impact any of the things that we're talking about in terms of family engagement. And so in a future conversation, I hope that we have a chance to think about how technology can actually increase family engagement and involvement across the system, and also encourage more of the innovations that were discussed today, or be a support and a facilitator of some of those innovations. And finally, I just want to name that we're in a really interesting time in California where we have multiple large-scale policy initiatives at play. In addition to universal pre-kindergarten, we have community schools, for example, who are providing a lot of the wraparound services that we were discussing in terms of aftercare, before care, summer programs, etc. And what an opportunity it can be for leaders to think about how these multiple policy initiatives can have intersecting points to elevate the greater issue of educator diversity and its positive impact for students. Please join me if you are in the audience today of this webinar in thanking our practitioner panelists. They're incredibly busy and they took time out of their schedule, as well as our scholar, Professor Markowitz from UCLA, for their time today. If you're interested in being a part of our future webinars, you can provide feedback to us. You will have access to a recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck on our website in the near future. You can also join our newsletter if you would like more information. We are also on social media, and we have started an Equity Leadership Now podcast where we'll be sharing more scholarship that's relevant to the issues that are faced by California's current leaders. Thank you so much for coming today, and we wish you a wonderful start to your November and to the end of this calendar year. Thank you again.